Please, I know you're used to moving quickly, scanning, protecting yourself from feeling too much, but I need you to stay here with me just for a moment. What I'm about to tell you, it's not a story about rockets or companies or headlines. It's about something I've never been able to say out loud until now. It's about her. And maybe, if you listen closely, it's also about you. I want you to picture something with me. Picture a man who has spent his entire life building impossible things. Structures that reach toward Mars. Systems that rewire how humans move, think, connect. A man who sees problems in 4 dimensions and solves them before most people even understand the question. Now, picture that same man late at night sitting alone in a room that costs more than most people will learn in a lifetime. Staring at his phone, wondering if he will ever be chosen. Not for what he's built, not for what he represents, but for who he is when no one is watching. That man is me. And for the longest time, I convinced myself the loneliness was just the price, the cost of seeing further, of working harder, of caring about things that won't matter for 100 years. I told myself that emotional connection was a luxury I simply didn't have time for, that vulnerability was a distraction, that if I could just solve one more problem, build one more system, push one more boundary, then maybe the ache would go away. It never did. Stay with me. I know this might feel heavy, but there's a reason I'm telling you this now. There's a reason I need you to hear what happened. You see, I thought I understood love. I thought I had experienced it. I had marriages. I had partnerships. I had moments where I believed someone truly saw me. But here's what I've learned, and here's what I need you to understand. There is a difference between being admired and being known. There is a difference between being desired for what you provide and being cherished for who you are in the silence. And for most of my life, I didn't know that difference existed. I gave everything I had to people who loved the idea of me. The vision, the ambition, the impossible made possible. But when I was tired, and I mean truly exhausted, the kind that sleep doesn't fix. When I was scared, when I was lost in my own mind trying to solve problems that had no clear answer, I was alone. And I started to believe that was just my design, that men like me weren't built for softness, that we traded emotional intimacy for impact. I was wrong. Do you know what it feels like to achieve everything the world tells you matters and still feel unseen? To stand in rooms full of people who hang on your every word, and yet know that not one of them would recognize the sound of your actual voice. The one you use when you're afraid, when you're uncertain, when you just need someone to say, I'm here. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with success. It's not the loneliness of having nothing. It's the loneliness of having everything except the one thing that makes any of it mean something. Connection, presence, someone who stays not because of what you might build tomorrow, but because of who you are right now in this moment, broken pieces and all. And then she walked into my life, not dramatically, not with fireworks or destiny announcing itself. She walked in quietly, the way truth always does, the way real things arrive, without performance, without needing to prove themselves. And at first, I didn't even recognize what was happening. I thought she was just another person passing through, someone who would admire the exterior and eventually leave when they realized the man underneath wasn't as shiny. But she didn't leave. She stayed in the uncomfortable silences. She stayed when I was too deep in my own head to be good company. She stayed when I forgot to ask how a day was because I was solving problems in my mind that wouldn't exist for 5 years. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, she started doing something no one had ever done before. She started seeing me. Not Elon Musk, the founder. Not Elon Musk, the visionary. Not even Elon Musk, the complicated public figure everyone has an opinion about. She saw the man who wakes up at 30 a.m. with his heart racing because he's terrified of failing the people who believe in him. The man who sometimes forgets to eat because his mind won't stop moving. The man who carries the weight of impossible promises and wonders if he'll ever be enough. She saw that man and she didn't run. Don't leave yet. There's more I need to tell you because what happened next changed everything I thought I understood about love, about worth, about what it means to be chosen. I started to realize that all my life I had been performing, even in my most intimate relationships. I was performing competence, performing certainty, performing the role of the man who has all the answers because I believed deep in some unexamined place that if I ever stopped performing, if I ever let someone see the uncertainty, the fear, the deep well of longing I carried, they would leave. She taught me that the performance was the very thing keeping me from being loved. One night, and I remember this so clearly, it feels like it's still happening. We were sitting together and I was trying to explain something complicated about a project I was working on, going into detail the way I always do, filling the space with information because information feels safe. And she just looked at me, gentle, patient, and she said, I don't need you to impress me, I need you to be here with me. It broke something open in me, something I didn't even know was locked. Because in that moment, I realized she wasn't asking me to be more, she was asking me to be real. And the terrifying, beautiful truth was that being real meant admitting I didn't have all the answers. It meant admitting I was lonely. It meant admitting that for all the Mars missions and innovations and world-changing visions, what I wanted most was to be held by someone who knew my name in the dark. Stay with me. I know this is vulnerable. I know it might feel like too much, but I need you to understand why this matters. Why her saying yes to me wasn't just about a proposal. It was about something deeper. For months, I watched her. I watched the way she moved through the world with a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. I watched the way she listened, really listened, not to respond, but to understand. I watched the way she held space for complexity, for contradiction, for the messy truth of being human. And I started to realize this woman wasn't just kind. She was wise. She had lived. She had been hurt. She had loved and lost and rebuilt herself. And instead of closing down, instead of becoming hard or cynical or self-protective, she had become more open, more compassionate, more whole. She had done the work I was just beginning to understand existed. And somewhere in those months of watching, of slowly letting her in, of testing whether she would stay when things got complicated, I fell in love. Not the frantic, desperate kind of love that needs constant validation, but the steady, certain kind that feels like coming home. The kind that says, here is someone I want to build a life with, not because she completes me, but because she sees me and chooses me anyway. I started imagining a future I had stopped letting myself imagine. Mornings where I wake up next to someone who knows my rhythms. Evenings where I can be tired without being alone. Conversations that don't require me to translate myself. A partnership where my intensity isn't too much or my silence isn't a problem. Where I can be both the visionary and the man who sometimes just needs to rest. And then came the question I couldn't avoid anymore. What if I ask and she says no? Because here's the truth underneath all of this. I was terrified. Terrified that even this woman, this brilliant, patient, deeply loving woman who had seen me at my worst and stayed would ultimately choose something else. Someone easier, someone less complicated. Someone who didn't carry the weight I carry. I knew I had to ask anyway. There is more I want to tell you. About the moment I decided, about what I said, about how her face looked when I got down on one knee and offered her not just a ring but my whole self. But I want to make sure you're still with me, that you're ready to hear what comes next. Because this isn't just my story. If you're listening to this, really listening, it's because some part of you recognizes this longing, this itch to be truly seen. This question of whether you'll ever be chosen for who you actually are, not who you've learned to be. And I want you to know you're not alone in that question. You're not broken for wanting it. You're not asking for too much. You are exactly enough right now as you are. I want to tell you about the moment I knew I had to ask her. Really knew. Not the intellectual knowing that comes from checking boxes or meeting criteria. The bone-deep knowing that arrives like breath, necessary, undeniable, already happening before you name it. It was an ordinary evening. That's what made it extraordinary. We weren't at some grand event or milestone moment. We were simply existing together. She was reading on the couch, one leg tucked under her, that particular kind of stillness that comes from being completely absorbed in something. And I was supposed to be working, but instead I found myself watching her, watching the way her expression would shift slightly as she read, the way she'd occasionally reach up to touch her neck absently, lost in whatever world the pages were building. And I thought, I want this. I want 1,000 ordinary evenings exactly like this one. I want to watch her read for the rest of my life. I want the privilege of her presence, her stillness, her complete absorption in her own interior world while I'm in the same room building mine. I want the quiet intimacy of two people who don't need to perform for each other, who can just be. That's when I knew. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about a ring or a proposal. It's about what it means to finally understand that love isn't about finding someone who makes you complete. It's about finding someone who makes you brave enough to be incomplete, to be uncertain, to be still growing. For weeks after that realization, I carried the knowing around like a secret. I started planning, but not the way I planned missions or companies. This was different. This required a kind of attention I'd never given anything before. Not strategic attention, emotional attention. I had to understand what would matter to her, not what would impress the world or make a good story, what would feel true to who we actually were together. I thought about all the ways I'd gotten it wrong before. All the times I'd made grand gestures that were really about me proving something rather than truly seeing the other person. All the times I tried to solve the equation of love the way I solve technical problems, with force, with innovation, with sheer determination. And I understood finally that love doesn't work that way. Love requires surrender. It requires admitting you don't have control. It requires showing up as you are and trusting that's enough. So, I didn't plan something elaborate. I didn't hire orchestras or rent out landmarks. I planned something quiet, something that would be just for us, something that honored the truth of how she'd loved me. Not for the spectacle, But for the substance, I chose a place that mattered to us. A place where we'd had one of those conversations that changes you. Where she'd sat across from me and said something so honest it made me realize I'd been hiding my whole life. Where I'd felt for the first time in longer than I could remember that someone was seeing past every defense I built. Don't leave yet. I need you to understand what happened next because it's the part that matters most. The evening I planned to ask her, I was terrified. And I mean genuinely terrified in a way I haven't been since I was young. Not the fear of physical danger or business failure or public criticism. The fear of emotional rejection. The fear that I'd finally let myself want something this much, want someone this much, and discover I wasn't chosen. That even now, even with all the growth and vulnerability and showing up, it wouldn't be enough. I kept the ring in my pocket all day, feeling its weight, rehearsing what I wanted to say, and then abandoning every rehearsed word because they all sounded like someone else. They all sounded like the performance. And I knew with absolute clarity that this moment required the real me, the uncertain one, the one who didn't have all the answers. When the moment came when we were in that place that mattered, when the light was soft and her eyes were on mine, I almost couldn't speak. My throat felt tight. My hands were shaking. This woman who had seen me solve impossible problems, who watched me present to thousands of people without flinching, was now seeing me completely undone by the simple act of asking to be chosen. And that's exactly what I needed her to see. There is more I want to tell you, but I need you to stay present with me, because this is where the story turns. This is where everything I thought I understood about worth and love and being enough got rewritten. I got down on one knee, and before I could say anything perfectly constructed or poetic, before I could make this into something impressive, I just started talking. Really talking. I told her that I'd spent my whole life building toward distant futures, and she made me want to be here now. I told her that I convinced myself I was too complicated to be loved simply, and she loved me simply anyway. I told her that every person before her had wanted the myth, and she wanted the man, and that terrified me and healed me in equal measure. I told her I didn't have all the answers about what our life would look like, that I couldn't promise it would be easy or simple or conventional, that I was still learning how to be present, how to listen, how to choose connection over achievement. But I could promise that I would keep learning, that I would keep choosing her, that I would keep showing up as honestly as I knew how. And then I asked her to marry me. The silence that followed felt infinite. I watched her face, watched emotions move across it like weather, surprise, tenderness, something that looked like her own kind of fear. And I understood in that moment that she was making a real choice. Not a fairy tale choice. Not a choice based on what I could provide or what life with me would look like from the outside. But a choice about whether she wanted the specific man with all his complexity and intensity and unfinished edges. Stay with me. This is the part I've been trying to get to. The part that changed everything. She started crying, not sad tears, something deeper. Relief tears, recognition tears, and she said yes. She said yes with her whole body. She said yes like she'd been waiting to be asked this exact question by this exact person in this exact way. She said yes like she saw me, really saw me, and chose me anyway. And when she said it, something in my chest that had been clenched for decades finally loosened. Because here's what I understood in that moment. And here's what I need you to understand. Her yes wasn't just about me. It was about her choosing to believe in something I'd stopped believing in. That real love, the kind that sees your darkness and your light, your brilliance and your brokenness, your public self and your 30 the AM self. That real love is possible, that it exists, that you don't have to perform for it or earn it or prove yourself worthy of it. You just have to be brave enough to show up honestly and ask for it. She said yes to my proposal, but what she was really saying yes to was the truth of us. The messy, imperfect, deeply real truth of two people who had both been hurt and both rebuilt themselves and both decided to risk being seen again. I put the ring on her finger with shaking hands and we sat there together, engaged, promised, chosen. And I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. Safe. Genuinely, completely safe. Safe enough to be uncertain. Safe enough to be still. Safe enough to stop building toward the next thing and just be here in this moment with this woman who saw my worth before I did. There is so much more I want to tell you about what happened after. About how it feels to wake up every day knowing you're chosen. About how love has changed the way I see everything. My work, my purpose, the future I'm building. But I want to make sure you're ready to hear it. Because if you're still listening, I know something about you. You're someone who understands longing. Who knows what it feels like to wonder if you'll ever be truly seen.